Welcome back. You're still watching Daybreak on this
imperfections,
day of
blackheads. Try Garnier's Pure Active 3-in-1 Charcoal, powered by salicylic acid and purified charcoal to reduce pimple-causing germs by 99.5%. One product, 3 uses for a pure skin. Garnier Pure Active 3-in-1 Charcoal, #1 in South Africa. By Garnier, naturally.
MSMEs, that is Simon Chelugui. Sometime last week, that was on Friday, he was speaking about disabusing some of the allegations about people being asked to register. Nobody is being required to register at the moment.
We need
but also said that those loans will be available at the rate of 8%, and they'll also be making use of technology, including mobile phone network that we have in the country to disperse those loans. You can get up to 50,000 shillings, but if you prove that you can carry more credit, then that will be extended to you. And I want us to discuss, because if you look at the front page of the Standard, you'll see Hustler Fund unpacked, and some of the details are on page 4 and 5. Irony of Hustler Fund as state executives budget cuts for supplies. Then also a loan scheme not for those who will need more funding. It started off as a grant during the campaigns and mutated first to be a conditional grant. That's according to Bill Okero. A new border cost 80,000 shillings and above. Can it fund startups? The answer is no, according to Bill Okero. And gentlemen, let's talk about this. And Francis, let me ask you first, because previously we've seen other funds, the Youth Fund, the Women Enterprise Development Fund, Uwezo Fund as well. At the moment, it's collapsed into one, Biashara Kenya Fund, if I get the name correct, and says that the minimum capital for that is 2 billion shillings to be appropriated by Parliament. The regulations as proposed by the National Treasury talk about the maximum capital will be 50 billion shillings as appropriated by Parliament. Is it quite within the prudence of financial management to introduce such a huge fund under regulations, or would you require an act of Parliament?
Thank you very much, Sam. And the question about whether it should be introduced as an act of Parliament or as a regulation is neither here nor there. The first thing we need to do is make sure that this fund is available to the hustlers. I think that's #1 priority. And then once this fund is made available to the hustlers, then we could now think about modification of the law, whether it's now to introduce an act of Parliament or whether it is continuous improvement of the regulations. Because before the fund is activated, then all these, even the regulations that we're doing now, is just predicting, the challenges that will be there. But once now we roll out the fund, then we're going to find out what the challenges really are. And I'm sure that there's going to be a continuous engagement, whether it is continuous and therefore an improvement in the regulations. And if it is required then to be enacted through an act of Parliament, then I'm sure then we'll be able to do that. But I think the #1 priority is let the fund get to Kenyans, and then let us continuously improve on its efficiency, its effectiveness, and even the costs as we move forward. And Sam, just to take you a little back on the issue of genetic modification, just one last comment. Yes, just one comment. We have this genetic engineering in the way we do AI for our cows. Nowadays, it's possible to sex your cattle female, and it's possible to even select the color of the calf, whether it's the color or the body structure or the height or even the size of the udders, whether you want the udders big or small. You can actually do that, and that is through genetic modification, through genetic engineering. So I'm saying, Kenyans, we are already using genetic modification now. So please don't get over-alarmed about us consuming this product, because we are already using genetic engineering in our farming.
Despite a ban existing for all that time?
That's a good question.
Okay, let me take you back now to the Hustler Fund conversation, and because it is pegged on appropriation by Parliament, so even if these regulations are to be in place, have you brought to the House a supplementary budget that would really look for these resources and allocate them to the fund?
Yes, I'm certain that, first of all, we should be getting the regulations for the Hustlers Fund through the Committee on Delegated Legislation. I think they should, if they don't have them already, they should have them this week. And therefore, they expect now to go through them and bring them to Parliament now for approval. And I also expect that the Constitution allows a government to spend money and then later regularize it through a supplementary budget. So it will be within the law to appropriate that money and then come now to Parliament to regularize through the supplementary budget. So it's actually well in order. It doesn't have, we don't have to do the opposite. I think it's Article 101, we call it Article 101. So we don't have to apportion that money first. The government, the executive in its wisdom, can appropriate that money to the fund and then bring now that for regularization through a supplementary budget.
Honorable Tongoy, because this is not your first term in Parliament, how does that work? Because I would agree that, yes, pay salaries before the budget estimates are passed by Parliament. But can you really spend money on a new fund on the strength that you can spend up to 50% of what is budgeted without approval of the House? Yes, yet this is a new fund?
No, as my friend and colleague put it, the law can allow the government to spend to a maximum 10% without Parliament approval and later submitting supplementary budget. But on this one, I'm very certain the majority of this money, the 50 billion, may not be necessarily government money to me. The way the president was actually at some point was putting it is it could be actually more of in microfinance funds that are lended to borrowers, but at there is a way the government cushion so that the lenders, the hustlers, get it at very reduced rates. So the 50 billion, not really, it has not been brought to Parliament. But one time I was listening to the president explaining, it's not really necessarily money from the government covers. Yes.
You're confusing me because when I look at the guidelines, even the advisory board is comprised of majority of the people there are from the government. They are PSS. Let me just get that right, so that I don't misquote. So you're talking about the president will appoint the board chair, then the board members are PS National Treasury, PS MSMEs, PS Trade, Attorney General or his representative, 2 persons appointed by the Cabinet Secretary of MSMEs, and then the administrator, who is the secretary of the board or also the CEO. So you look at it, it's government heavy. So you're saying that these funds that are being administered are not necessarily...
Yeah, to me, unless somebody really demonstrates or shows, as much as definitely it's going to be a government-managed fund, government is going to in many ways also contribute to it. But the majority of the money could be more private funds.
Okay. Honorable Mogaka, what is your thinking about this? That we're just about to introduce a fund, a huge fund, because in the history of the country we've not had 50 billion shillings. I don't know the total allocation to youth fund since inception in 2007 so far, if it has hit 50 billion shillings. But what is your thinking about what we are doing?
Thank you very much, and you couldn't have asked me this at a better time. Coming as I do from the banking background, because I've done more than 20 years of banking as a credit manager, during which we have handled so many credit lines. For your information, there are development partners who channel cheap credit through banks. One of them is our International Finance Corporation. We have USAID. And I do remember during my banking life, I was associated in designing and management of the initial Juakali credit program, which have mutated to so many microfinance institutions. The problem with Kenya's development is not lack of credit. It is the cost of credit. And the lack of a unified policy on management and support to small and micro enterprises. I'm glad my sister, Honorable Beatrice Elachi, brought a motion in the House, which we voted for, pushing this country to make a unified policy on managing small and micro enterprises. The problem with the proposed Hustler Fund and the government hand and face in it is that from the outset, it is not going to be a fund that will be administered justly or equitably, because government has no business in managing credit lines or grants. And that is why, at the outset, I would have advised that whatever name we want to give this fund, let us first agree on the basics. Is it a grant or is it a loan? If it is a grant, well enough, let us know how this grant will trickle down to the targeted off-takers. But if it is a loan, I would advise government that we already have enough institutions and banks which administer dispassionately credit lines that will not come and say this one belongs to this political coalition or that. Yeah? And that is why I am saying that setting up a fund like this is really replicating the Uwezo Fund, which President Uhuru at that time made a very dangerous political statement that the money that was going to be used for the runoff will now be used to establish Uwezo Fund. And therefore, it sank into Kenyans' heads that this money was anyway going to be spent in an election, and therefore, when they took it, they had no obligation to pay back. And this election pledge of creating a Hustler Fund has the similar dangers of sinking into the heads and minds of the off-takers that really we are hustlers and we are being paid back for what we did during electioneering. So this is why I am saying if I were government, they would quickly distance themselves and let independent institutions administer this thing, because every Kenyan is a Kenyan. Every Kenyan is entitled to government support, and every Kenyan deserving is expected to have access to this fund by whatever name. That would be what I would contribute for now.
And Honorable Kure, I don't know how much you've been able to peruse through what is being spoken about the Hustler Fund in terms of the policy suggestions that are coming in. But when you say that it's 8% interest rate, is that annually or monthly or daily, or what is it?
Thank you very much, Sam. And to just give a quick answer to my colleague here, we are clear on what the fund is. It's not a grant, it's a loan. And this is a loan at only 8% per annum. It's going to be the cheapest loan in the market. And the 8% interest rate is not just, it's not make it profitable. It's just to maintain the fund so that the technology that's being used in terms of maintenance of that, so that once the seed money is put into this fund, then we don't have to apportion any more money into the fund unless we want to increase the number of customers that are actually taking this particular fund. And just to break it down, this morning... Just
before you move away from the percentage, so 8% per annum, but you pay back in how much time? If I take 50,000 shillings, I pay back in how long?
The minimum...
Because I saw something says that you pay back within a month?
No, the minimum time, I think, is 2 weeks, and then you can choose the duration. You can actually choose the duration of the time that you take this loan. And if it's 8% per month, it's going to be, again, calculated on a daily rate. So you know, you have to... So it's 8% per annum. But if you repay it within a week, then it's just 8% divided by 365 days times the number of days that you've used the fund. So it's going to be like 0.0000 something percent per day, or per week, or whatever you tend to pay. So the fact that you've taken this one doesn't mean you repay it within a year. So
what is the maximum repayment period, if you know?
I think it's 12. I'm not sure. To be honest, I'm not sure about the maximum duration because again, these regulations are still going through public participation.
Okay.
But to answer your question about interest rate and to really make it clear, because some of our brothers and sisters from the other side, don't really seem to understand how this fund will do to Kenyans.
What is the other side?
our Azimio brothers and sisters. I have a friend called Osama. He's one of my constituents. He's a Shylock, a registered Shylock. If he gives you 10,000 shillings and you repay within a month, you pay back with 4,000 shillings. So that is 40% per month. So if he gives you loan at 40%, in 12 months, that is 480% per annum. And he was telling me this because I actually had a conversation with him when I was coming here to the studio because I wanted to get the facts right. That the maximum usually people take to repay this money is usually 2 months. Within 2 months people are able to pay back. So, and at what rate? 40% per month, and that is 480% per annum. So imagine now how this fund will help if we're going to reduce now that interest rate from 480% to 8% per annum. M-Shwari, one of the highest use facilities in digital lending, has a facilitation fee of 7.5%, just facilitation fee. So for you to access M-Shwari, you are charged a facilitation fee of 7.5% of the amount of money you borrow, irrespective of the duration that you choose to pay. The two other very popular funds, popular platforms, Tala and Branch. Tala charges between 84 and 150% per annum. Branch charges between 156 and 348% per annum. That's around 1% per day. No, Branch charges you around 1%.
Do you know why they do that?
Yes.
Do you know why they charge such an amount?
Of course, they're in business. They want to make profit. Number two, the risk of lending to digital lenders, the risk is high.
So does the risk disappear when it's a hustler fund?
The risk doesn't disappear, but the profitability in terms of how much money you want to borrow, you have more chances of borrowing more money if you, for example, repay that money. And come on, I think 2 years ago I learned about Fuliza. And even up to now, myself, I use Fuliza. Sometimes you find you're out of money and you need to send money, so you actually use Fuliza. And the interest rates are very high. So if we make this fund accessible to Kenyans, yes, and research has also shown that these borrowers down the pyramid are actually better in paying back the loan than actually let me call them the ballers. Those people down that borrow 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 10,000, 20, up to 50,000 are actually better payers than those that borrow, a lot of money. And if you actually check the loan books of most banks, and if I would quote, remember that's how Equity Bank, for example, rose to be the biggest financial institution across the region, because they actually realized that lending money to, remember when they came up with that slogan, more member, like I'm a member, and then they realized having credit facilities to Mama Mboga, to Boda Boda, those people that earn very low income, actually they would pay better than lending to the big businesses. And that's how Equity Bank has now, over years, become bigger than most of the banks that targeted the big corporates and the big and the large institutions. So this is going to be a big saving for Kenya. And those people that have never had to borrow 3,000 shillings will not understand. But I interact with people my constituents, who sometimes someone will tell you, Mheshimiwa, I just need 2,000 shillings to start a business. And I'll give an example. There's a lady called, I think it's called Lydia. It's one of my constituents from Kasarani. So she tells me that one of the times that I was visiting her school, she told me that she needed money for school fees or for something, and I gave her 2,000 shillings. And she figured out, instead of using these 2,000 to pay the fees, she went and bought clothes from Tumba, washed them, ironed them, and now was able to add value to them from she was able to buy, I think, a piece at 10 shillings, and she was able now to sell those clothes at, I think, 50 shillings or 100 shillings. How I know this is because she brought me a gift, you know, of a coat for my daughter and said, Mheshimiwa, you are the one who gave me capital for this business. How much? 2,000 shillings.
It was meant to be.
So this money, and when you hear the argument that 50,000 is very little money, again, I say it is people who have never had a problem of 2,000 shillings. And I know there are very many Kenyans out there who just needs 10,000 shillings to unlock their potential and, you know, and do a business that will grow their income and that will make them put food onto the table. Okay,
and I'm looking at this story, Honorable Gabriel, on page 4 of the Standard, that the fund regulations highly speak of utilizing organized groups in our local markets, stable banking groups, chamas, and other special interest teams across the country. On this, the policymakers make sweeping assumptions that these organized groups and chamas have no elaborate internal financial mechanisms to access credit. The reason these groups have thrived and expanded into all our local markets and villages is because they're in response to a market failure for these low-income groups to access credit. So my question to you is, yes, it is a promise. It has to be fulfilled because that's how politics works. But then again, what are the mechanisms to ensure that it succeeds so that you don't have a lot of money? I don't know what is the success story of Youth Fund, for instance, in your constituency, and how this fund must learn lessons from the Youth Fund.
That's true, but I think as my brother put it, this is something that is still going through the process of public participation and formative stages. I'm sure learning from the previous lessons.
I'd imagine this is part of it, public participation.
Yes. Taking lessons from the WESO Fund, the Youth Fund, the government must have learned a lot. There was a higher default rate in the WESO Fund and maybe Youth Fund as well. So there are going to be safeguards and regulation put in place that the failure, so that we are going to avoid the default in this fund, so that the majority of Kenyans can benefit from the same. As much as 50 billion look to be much, it's not much as yet, considering the number of hustlers, or the number of individuals that may.
Why I'm saying that is because if you look at the Biashara Kenya Fund, it talks about a minimum capital of 2 billion shillings. So as Parliament approves, you cannot allocate less than 2 billion shillings. So if you have to share it across the counties, you see how that translates to. If you say 50 billion shillings is the maximum, if one day Parliament appropriates 50 billion to the fund, you're talking about an average of more than 1 billion shilling per county. So it is a lot of money.
Yeah, but if you want to calculate us by the number of Kenyans, you don't really appropriate us. You cannot look in that angle. Assume a quarter of even the country. Like we have almost 48 to 50 million. So you assume
12 million Kenyans.
Yeah, a quarter, 30% of that number is quite a substantial number. So I think the important point here is, how do we put in structures in place to minimize the default? Because this alone is clear, with a lower interest of 8%. That is good enough. But how are we going to sustain it can only be sustained if the default is minimized. One thing we are trying to do is to remove the bottlenecks that makes doing business hard. That actually was hindering the low level to access the other kind of loans in the market. So to me, that's what Parliament is supposed to look into. That is what the government is trying to really structure, to put in place mechanism and regulations that, as much as we are going to remove the bottleneck, it's also going to ensure that the default is less.
Okay.
Yeah.
I hear you, Honorable Gabriel. And I want to take a break from that conversation just for a moment to talk about a developing story this morning, that a 5-story building that was where 100 tenants were evacuated yesterday in rural town has collapsed. And I'm sure you may remember that story by one Governor of Kiambu, Kimani Wamatangi, telling tenants to leave that house, and we're getting reports this morning that the house has collapsed, and that brings to, is it 3 houses that have collapsed in Kiambu County over the past few weeks, just a time that the country has witnessed the collapsed building in Kasarani. We are getting more details for you as soon as we do. We'll be bringing them to your side. But just to repeat that, the 5-story building where 100 tenants were evacuated yesterday in Ruiru Town, Kiambu County, has collapsed. And the hope is that nobody has been injured, bearing in mind that all the tenants had left that building. And back to the conversation here in studio about the Hustler Fund. And Honorable Mogaka, yes, so the conversation will continue. What are your constituents saying about this at a time that, you know, part of the reason why there has been this conversation is because people said that they were being blacklisted or listed on the credit reference bureaus. They could not qualify to access credit. So if you have cheaper facility like what the Hustler Fund is promising to be, and from your experience, will this make it better for them to borrow money, fix the economic gaps, and bring it back?
Thank you very much. A very good question indeed. And my constituents and the entire country is waiting. And my brothers who are trying to feel nice and learning the ropes in government, we wish them luck. And I honestly say this country is ours, and any good idea that will help transform this country, we will be the first to support, irrespective of our political persuasions. And that is the reason why I believe in a short while you will call me, among others, to this show to confirm that I wish the conceivers of some of these new policies and government ideas would come and tell you they wish they listened. Because let's not allow our country start reinventing wheels when the wheels already exist. If the government has decided that they are introducing a new credit line, which is what it should be called to disabuse itself from these political nuances, if they are wishing to introduce a new credit line, the first thing is to think what is the best vehicle for delivery of that new credit. And obviously, an assembled government department or corporation is not going to be the best vehicle to deliver, because that is quoting disaster from the word go. And that is why I say that, the finance sector is tested and tried. And we are from multinational banks in this country to Shylocks. And we have merry-go-rounds, we have chamas. So if government has decided that it is supporting whoever they want to support with some form of credit, it is important that they listen and use already existing, established, costless delivery channels. And why this credit line that has been conceived looks dead on arrival is while government is fighting that the borrowers of that credit do not default, government itself is the biggest defaulter on suppliers who have delivered goods and services to government. And government knows that it has about 500 billion shillings outstanding of unpaid pending bills. You don't tell people that you are going to give 50 billion, which is 10% of the outstanding pending bills, particularly when these pending bills under the Public Procurement and Disposal Act, you know that 30% of government supplies went to persons with disability, youth and women. Meaning, therefore, of the 500 billion outstanding, more than 150 billion are for the poor, women, youth, and persons with a disability who government at that time had good intentions to give a platform to flourish. What are we doing about this? Because if government sorted out these pending bills, the economic multiplier in this country would instantly change. When are we going to get these 50 billion lent to whoever it is targeted, convert into value given, generate revenue to come and pay? Yeah. So this is why I am saying that I don't want my government to enter into circuses that are not going to help us accelerate the rate of growth of the GDP in this republic.
Okay.
And it is important that we say it early enough that this government needs to have its priorities right. As much as it was an election pledge, let us not put too much premium on this at the expense of missing out on what will really trigger economic development. Do you have an intervention?
I hear you, and you're saying that it will be important for the government to look for existing delivery channels. I'm just wondering, how then, because you've been a banker, how do you demarcate these are the funds from the government, they're meant for the Hustler Fund, this is our money that we need to lend to the same target market, and you also want to remain profitable. So how do you prioritize and how do you choose which loan to give to who at what rate?
Thank you. That one is existing. That is why I am saying as a banker, and I am advising my government for free to assemble bankers, particularly those who have operated schemes of loans. They will get whatever for free, because banks have their money they lend at their own rates, and they have money from schemes which they lend or administer on terms of the sponsor. Yeah, it also happens in the insurance industry, where instead of you paying premium to get cover, you deposit a fund and the insurance company, which has the infrastructure, administers it for you. Yeah, so that is why I am warning that setting another animal to administer an ill-equipped unit to purport to administer a thing they don't know they are going to learn on is really courting disaster. And by the time they make enough mistakes, we will have lost the bulk of what. And we also have, remember, the problem of a wage bill in this country. Why, again, establish another entity within government to consume as expenses as part of the 50 billion that is meant to go to the ultimate beneficiaries? And I'm saying it is important that we listen to those who have been there, because I say I have a duty to support this government to succeed, because once it does, then it is my country that has succeeded.
Okay. All right. Honorable Francis Kuria, so yes, so now you look at some of the proposals in the guidelines, or rather the regulations as presented by the National Treasury. What is that then that you think has to be done to secure the existence of the fund, not just for this year, not just for this term, but in the long run, so that you keep making that intervention to improve people's lives?
Thank you very much for your question. And I think the irony in the statement by my honorable colleague, especially remembering that they told us we are losing 2 billion shillings every day, is when they hear that we are just allocating 50 billion, just for access of credit to our hustlers. I know the 2 billion shillings that they used to steal every day. I think the essence here, Sam, is, first of all, the imagination that we need infrastructure in terms of, I think when people think about the Hustlers Fund, they're thinking we need to have banking halls, we need to have branches, we need to have, vehicles that, and all that. But there's a lot of improvement in technology. And what we're saying is that this is going to be available as a digital fund. Like, you just get on your phone, you use, if you don't have a smartphone, you use what's called USSD, star something hash, and then you access the fund. If you have a smartphone, probably you go through an application and you access it. So in terms of building the infrastructure, there is existing technology, and this existing technology has been proved effective in use of other platforms, whether it is, for example, M-Shwari, whether it is Fuliza, and whether it is all these other, applications that people use to access credit. So in terms of infrastructure, there is existing infrastructure, and technology has actually shown us that through use of, for example, blockchain technology, that the costs, the cost, the safety, the security of the fund then is actually assured. The only thing that we need to do is educate the users of this fund about that first of all, it's not a grant, it's a loan that they have to repay. And two, really teaching them the culture of honoring your debt obligations. And I think we as a country need to start having that conversation and telling people it is prudent to honor your debt obligations.
So I get you, USSD or smartphone, whichever technology, but with these other existing loans, there's someone at the other end who is serving you. So in this case, who will be serving you? Is it the board? Is it the fund's own technology? Or are you going to recruit some banks or some mobile phone service providers?
There is no... part of the 8% interest rate, a part of this money is for the infrastructure and for the few technical staff, for example, that will work on maintaining the system. There's going to also to be a collaboration with the existing telecom providers in terms of making use of their call centers. So, for example, if for example, for some reason, maybe you're not able to access the fund or you have a question, then you're able to call. So there's that ongoing conversation. Again, remember, Sam, all this thing we're saying is that we haven't rolled out the fund yet. So these are all ongoing conversation discussions. For example, on call centers. If for example, for some reason, I'm not able to, there's a problem with my phone, whatever it is, then where do I seek help from? That's why now there's a conversation about partnership with telecommunication companies that will give us like call center services, so that you're able to call whether it is like 100, like they use I think 100 or 200 for Safaricom, then you're able to just place a call and get your queries to be answered. And so the use, again, I want to emphasize this, that this fund will solely or will highly rely on use of technology. So that, I remember the president was telling us how, like as members of parliament are frustrated about the use of the fund, because people are expecting you to create committees at the constituency level, at the ward level, at the county level. So it has really removed a lot of human touch on the fund. So you don't have to take it to the chief or to anybody for approval. That is just an interaction between yourself and the system. And the 8% that you pay is being used now to maintain the system and to maintain the few technical staff. Okay, that would have to. I hear you. There's still a question that is not answered, but I take a response to mean that is still work in progress. that is on who is behind the infrastructure and who you'll be speaking to from your mobile phone. But Honorable Gabriel, so looking at it and wondering, so once this money, we take a look at the feedback first. Right, let's take a look at the feedback of what Kenyans are saying about this conversation about the Hustler Fund. On Twitter, it's at Citizen TV Kenya. Diego Simba is saying, I form the impression that the MPs don't understand how the funds will be administered. The draft says the board, which is yet to be appointed, will set the regulations, but CS Chelugui has already set his own regulations. Well, okay, many questions, more questions than answers. Remy Butia, as the government starts to roll out the Hustler Fund, it needs to keep out cartels and ensure the right people benefit from it. There's need for the government to offer a long-term approach to address challenges that affect MSMEs in Kenya. F. Okango, not even the proponents of the Hustler Fund know about it. Every month it's been mutating into different things for the last 3 months. Hustlers might just end up with an enhanced Fuliza. Bob Otieno, you're saying that Hustler Fund is a friendly program from bottom to top. And once it starts operation, I think it will give M-Shwari, Tala, and KCB or M-Pesa money lenders a run for
their money. And of course, you see the mixed views. People thinking that not so much is not yet known. And you also get a feel here because it's still work in progress, like I said. But once it gets implemented, you look at it and there's any guideline on how much will go to which region. So how do you ensure that all regions are treated equally so that you don't have certain areas benefiting more because probably they're more tech savvy, or maybe they're more involved in certain businesses, so that you ensure there is also some spread across the country in terms of how the country grows?
Yeah, good question, and can also feel the comments of Kenyans. It's true to acknowledge that it's still all these are still in progress. Public participation, their views also are valid. You know, Kenyans can also able to ventilate and able to bring up their opinion on the same. Now, to your question, as we still say that it's still a work in progress, I'm sure the board that is being formed or suggested by the Treasury, National Treasury, will able to put structures in place, just akin to the other funds that are already there before, the Daybreak fund, to ensure that there is region balance and there is equity in distribution of this fund. That one I'm certain and for sure is going to be there. The regulation is yet out to authoritatively able to say exactly this is how it's going to work. Okay. But we are just able to raise issues of maybe even our worries on probably the success of it. We have been able to see the already kind of institutions that are already giving out kind of entities that are giving loans, even at a higher rates, like Felicia is doing at 18. And the reports out there are saying that actually the default rate is almost at 0. So this one, when well administered, the structures are put in place. We are very sure and certain that it's going to succeed. Okay. And the issue of balance, as I said, either they are going to form, I'm not sure yet, but I'm very sure that they are going to, the kind of board, they are going to have, of course, some kind of secretariat. Yes, yes. Yeah, so that is going to ensure that there equity in administration of the fund. All right,
Honorable Gabriel, let's now bring you that story again about the house that has collapsed in Ruiru sub-county of Kiambu County. And of course, we know that that is a house where Governor Kimani Wamatangi yesterday was witnessing an order to have the 100 tenants from that building evacuated. Over 100 tenants were evacuated yesterday, and now the house has collapsed this morning, a 5-story building that had been occupied by 100 tenants up until yesterday. We're still trying to source for more information and speak to a reporter on the ground to bring us to speed of the latest in as far as this is concerned. Remember that some of those tenants were also pleading with the landlord or the owner of that building to at least give back their deposits so that they could go and secure some different housing. But all that now has come to that. The house has collapsed. And we'll be sure to bring you the latest pictures from location, but also the reactions. We're also trying to get hold of the governor of Kiambu, that is Kimani Wamatangi. As soon as we're able to do that, we'll be sure to bring him on board to speak to that developing story. And back to studio. Now, apart from the Hustler Fund, there's also the promise of the bottom-up economics, different programs, and also the many promises within the manifesto. One of them is the 100 dams that are supposed to be put up in the next 5 years or so. Is it 5 or 10? 5 years, I believe. And they are to be put up through public-private partnership at a cost of 500 billion shillings. And Honorable Mogaka, public-private partnership to bring together 100 dams rather, and then he said that part of that money will be recovered from the revenues collected from those that will be receiving the water. How do we fix this at a time that you're also dealing with, remember, the independent power producers in this country that have led to what we are dealing with now, very high energy tariffs. How do you do this? Yes, we have to develop. We need the water. But how do we check the cost of that?
Thank you. Private-public partnership is an easier way or more cost-effective way of financing development. Because you know Kenya runs a budget deficit, and therefore the better way of borrowing to satisfy the budget deficit is by trying to partner with private investors to develop those projects that we think are flagship projects that will help this country develop. And there is a law on private-public partnership, and there is nothing new in that. But what we have had, like you rightly say, in the energy sector, the people who this country trusted to engage and negotiate for terms of bringing in independent power generators literally abused office and committed the country to tariffs that are not sustainable. And Kenya is locked in it because, you know, the ultimate off-taker of power in this country is Kenya Power and Lighting Company. And the moment they have entered into a contract on how much they will purchase the power from the generator, then you know the consumer of power is locked, because they must do a markup, knowing that whatever contract that has been entered between the country and the power generator is fixed, the price is fixed. And it hasn't helped that many of those independent power generators use fuel. And because our fuel prices fluctuate, the cost of it is also transferred to the consumer of power. And that is why we are dealing with a completely uncompetitive power prices in this country. If you look at what our neighbors are paying for power, it clearly makes Kenya a very expensive investment destination. And I do hope that this government will re-engage the signatories to those contracts and open up renegotiations for us to sign up or review and get into sustainable tariffs. And while we have said that, dams is another monster, because you know we are in the middle of a very unprecedented drought. And if we had sufficient water, some of these northern areas which are perennially suffering from recurrent droughts would have enough water. And remember, Israel is in a desert, and they are one of the largest exporters of farm produce. We need deliberate steps to ensure that we have sufficient water. If there is no water, remember, as in the western region, the lake basin, we have unending rain. And perhaps this country needs to see how to pump or to harvest the rain in Western Kenya, even if it is to incentivize every homestead to harvest water, get a reservoir, and pump this water to the northern region. It is perhaps going to be a better thing and a more realistic thing than engaging in dam construction, private-public partnership. We end up with no dam, and the country gets committed to pay for no dam delivery. Because many of those dam constructors or private entities that are going to invest may not be Kenyan. And unless we really become patriotic enough and insist that let us only commit Kenya money to outside investors, when there is no Kenyan who can do it. Unless we do this deliberate step in this country, we are going to continue exporting jobs from Kenya to other countries, and that ultimately is not going to help us achieve economic development.
Right, and Francis, you chair the Finance Committee, and one of the key drivers and determinants as to whether we'll succeed or the government will succeed or not is in terms of the much that you're able to collect. So the other day you appointed, or rather, the president appointed a new chair of the Kenya Revenue Authority and giving a different target. So how should our revenues grow in the next 5 years or so for us to really attain this promise? Because they are capital intensive, despite the plans to work with the private investors.
Thank you very much. One of the things that the Kenya County government has realized is that since the enactment of the PPP Act of 2021, we haven't really been able to maximize its use. And I think the focus mainly has been on energy sector. And as has been pointed out, someone was lazy in negotiation or deliberately, negotiated for a low deal for us. And that's why the cost of, part of the reason why, as you rightly pointed out, the rate of tariffs has gone up. But we have just focused on energy sector and roads as a PPP partnerships. And that's why now we're saying, now let us move from those two to now dams. And dams will have two solutions. First of all, it will help us solve the issue of drought in this country, that is going to help us, grow more food. And two, it will also help us in terms of reduce the cost of debt, because that way it's not a debt. That now the risk of the implementation, because we also lose a lot of time. When the government is sourcing for months, we lose a lot of time and therefore end up increasing the cost of doing these projects when the government has to do them. But when the private sector doing it, in terms of looking for finance and doing it, then they're able to implement it at a lower duration of time, and therefore, getting as high value for money. You pointed out the role of KRA now in terms of raising taxes. And one thing that we've been very clear is that every Kenyan should and must pay their rightful share of taxes, as in everyone should pay. And the emphasis there before has been, we have been overtaxing the already entities that are paying taxes. So our focus has been asking those people already paying taxes to pay more. And that's why we have continuously increased VAT, because there's an existing infrastructure on VAT. We have continuously increased excess duty because there is an existing infrastructure of excess duty. And a lot of other people, especially in the informal sector, have not been able to pay their rightful share of taxes. So what we're going to do is now have a robust mechanism of making sure that everyone is netted into the tax bracket. In addition, Parliament has also been in a hurry to pass many pieces of legislation, especially in the finance bill, that have been challenged in court. We're checking with my committee on finance and national planning, and realize that we have more than 10 tax laws that have been challenged in court, and some of them have been halted. What that happens is that the taxes that we're supposed to correct through those particular legislation, then we don't collect them. And remember, the budget is approved by Parliament based on the predictions made on the finance bill on how much we're going to collect. So when that tax is challenged in court and a court order is issued and we don't collect that tax, it means that then the government has no option than to borrow to finance a budget that has already been approved. So one of the things that we're doing as now a committee is reviewing all those laws that have been challenged in courts with a view of reintroducing them and finding out why were they nullified. And I was okay, surprised to note that 90% of those nullifications due to lack of public participation. Some, I think, particular clauses were inserted during whether the first reading or second reading or somewhere in between without proper public participation, which is against our constitution. So part of our role now as a finance committee, because we are given this role of raising revenues for government, is to look at those laws that have been challenged in court, and then with a view of reintroducing them and rectifying the errors that were made in the process. And one of the cases that have been cited, I think 90% of the cases has been lack of public participation.
Is Is it mandatory for the finance bill to be subjected to public participation?
Yes, every law, every regulation in this country must go through public participation.
I'm asking that because when the budget, what are they called? The budget policy statement is presented to the House, there's thorough public participation, even with the people. But the finance bill comes almost towards the tail end of that process. When do you do that public participation?
That is why there has been a revision of the dates in when the public finance, the finance bill is available to Parliament, for example. And I think we should start to process the public finance bill, I think, in February next year, so that there is enough time to go to do public participation.
Okay. Now, there's something I wanted to follow up with the Honorable Gabriel from Narok West. I don't know why it's escaping my mind, but it's specifically on some of these proposals to put up these programs or projects based on the promise to the people. And for instance, if you had to say that you construct 100 dams at a cost of 500 billion shillings, and it's public-private partnership, so you subject the consumer to tariffs, and those tariffs will obviously have to be higher than if you had to say Nairobi Water Sewerage Company rates. So is it fair to subject Kenyans to a higher cost of living in the long run? Yes, you have the development, but this is a service that basically, it's a basic service. Should it be that expensive for Kenyans? How do you contain that cost in the future?
Good. I think, when you mention about the issue of the cost of the bottom-up, I'm sure that you know there are quite a number of programs to include even the housing, the issue of UHC, and many others. Of course, even including the one we have already discussed about the ASLA fund. But now, back to the issue of water and the dams. The issue of PPP, we quite know that, all know that is actually is the way to go. PPP is not the first time we are actually doing projects under that scheme.
Right.
The only thing is the Kenya Kwanza government is more focused. Initially, the directorate of PPP was in National Treasury. Now it has moved to trade for more efficiency and able to achieve its mandate more better, because the National Treasury could be more busy with other many things. To me, I think the issue of water, it's not all water services that are going to be done under the PPP program. Others normally going to be provided in the normal government way of doing it. But for the ease and for the intention of achieving the targets, majority of more expensive projects in water services are going to be done through the PPP. You said quite a amount of money. To me, I think is the issue of cost is neither here nor there. One, take example of yourself. Even the water services that we are already having in Nairobi, of course, there's always service charge that we are paying. Despite that, at times it's even it changes. It changes. At times, even actually half of the month is not even there. And so I think it's really, to me, I think it's necessary, it's long overdue, it's going to spur economical growth. And my friend, once these services are provided, the cost of living actually in one or another is going to go down. And Kenyans are going to get good returns and better to pay the same services. Yes.
No, that's interesting, and I do not dispute you saying yes that Kenyans can pay for them. But I'm just worried. What if you find that cost in the future? The price that consumers have to pay is way higher, more than double, more than triple of what you're paying.
Let me give you an example.
The impact on the cost of living.
Majority of industries or majority of institutions actually doing drilling or boreholes for their own water uses, which is quite expensive, maybe at times not sustainable, not environmental friendly, more than maybe actually having all these big dams provided for, having this water in plenty, and water supplied. And when we are doing the issue of aggregation, yeah, we are big, huge volumes of water through our dams, then supply to the majority, to higher volumes, there's always a natural way that the cost is going to go low.
Okay.
Yeah, it has been costed for, and it's not going to be expensive as majority of people there anticipate.
Okay. All right. Let's hope that what you're saying is what it will be.
It's not.
I'm just wondering if you leave basic service in the hands of private investors, I don't know what happens.
No, government regulations are going to be there. We promise you we are going to safeguard the interests of Kenyans.
They're also there in the energy sector. Honorable Tongoyo.
But we learn from the mistakes as a country.
Now we have to end this. Honorable Francis Kuria Kimani from Molo constituency, Honorable Stephen Mogaka from West Mugirango, and Honorable Gabriel Tongoyo from Narok West. There's a lot of West here. Thank you so much for making time for us of this conversation, and thank you, the viewer, for watching and sharing with us some of your feedback. And of course, we continue to await the developing story about that house that collapsed in Roiro in Kiambu County, of course, going down just a day after Governor of Kiambu County, Kimani Wamatangi, witnessed the evacuation of tenants who had been in the building, more than 100 of them. We're still waiting to get some images that we can bring to you, and of course, to continue with this conversation. Stay tuned. Up next is Sporty Monday. Willis Raburu will be here with his gang. Bye for now.